Welcome back to the Lane Farias Show. Before I begin, I must address that now that I have moved out, I will no longer have any need to refrain from my offensive wishes, and will now include violence, language, drug use, sexual material, and adult themes in my work when I see fit. I apologize to anyone who had the wrong impression of my creative mindset, but this would be my true, genuine personality. With that out of the way, let's get started.
There's a new sun rising up angry in the sky, and there's a new voice crying, we're not afraid to die. Let the old world make believe it's blind and deaf and dumb, but nothing can change the shape of things to come.
Lately, the bulk of my content has been anything I could think of related to Sylvellyn High. At this point, I believe it's reached its peak in terms of creative development, and I think my voice actors have pretty much worked all they're willing to do. So I thought I may as well explain the plot I have created over the years, as I don't think I'll have any incentive to make any more content related to the show other than several years from now in its final live-action TV version. But before I get to that, let me explain what this is. It started with me just coming up with the occasional idea for a stupid joke, like say, some characters are having an active conversation and one of them coughs in the middle of it, causing a few seconds of awkward silence, or having someone get so angry they turn into the firing my laser guy because why not? However, over time, I have actually developed a story for this, and it grew at a faster rate than any other project I ever worked on. Of course, with the surreal, unprofessional humor used as a novelty, Sylvellyn High centers around a self-proclaimed spoiled rich kid named James Almer, who had two dear friends by the names of Stacy Newman and Max Smith until the former moved away after elementary school. 4 years later, as he's still living as a bored walking corpse, Newman moves back as the most popular girl in the school. Popularity is taken seriously to an over-the-top degree in Sylvellyn High, to the point where the most recognizable male and female of the school get power over the school military with mechas, because why not? People have theorized the school's ranking system and wrote in the first floor girls' bathroom with a permanent marker a chart that pretty much tries to be an objective statement of students' worth by categorizing them into 7 tiers, because why not? This chart is called the tierarchy, and the most popular male and female in the school is addressed as the valedictorians, because why not? As James faces adversity and Stacy's substantial status gap, he resorts to climbing said hierarchy in all sorts of slimy, business-like schemes in order to reach her and reunite his friendship that he has missed for so long. Now that I have explained the premise, let's dive into the full plot. So as explained by the pilot I have released recently, James betrays his so-called friend Francis Scott by voting for Stacy Newman instead of the current Celeste Mayview as female valedictorian, causing him to go into further debt, and consequently rises to the 4th tier. From then on, it's basically just James coming up with all sorts of ways to gain status, such as selling his surplus relationships, pulling all-nighters so he wouldn't overthink in social situations, stuff like that. This is the most casual point of the show, and James's schemes are a little more lighthearted, which segues for more of the trademark surreal humor I emphasize. Meanwhile, there is a major conglomerate business by the name of Stanford Planning, founded and led by former male valedictorian Frederick Stanford, who hosts secret meetings with his elite members to discuss illegal methods to advance their business, to eventually reach their goal of upgrading the world by eliminating everyone they regard as surplus life, and only leaving the highest quality of people as an extremist measure to solve global issues, because why not? This group does not show the slightest suggestion of fear, guilt, or shame in their actions. They honest to God have absolutely zero morality, and the only thing on their minds is said plan, which they refer to as the goal. Stanford Planning is a front for a terrorist group known as the Blood Red Ties, which serves as a prominent antagonist. In addition, Sylvellyn High has an avid history of its valedictorians selfishly leading the school military by needlessly sacrificing the low-tier students just for the sake of convenience, and the current male valedictorian Randy Stockler is no exception to that. Stacy is smart and actually cares about people, so from here on she struggles to influence the school military while Randy is being such an unexemplary douchebag. To recap, James's time in the 4th tier is mostly comprised of simple schemes, an abundance of unprofessional humor, antagonization of Stanford Planning, and Stacy's rising contempt for Randy Stockler. Oh, and Max gets a girlfriend by the name of Jeanette Winston. This will be important later. As this arc draws to a close, James comes into contact with the kingpin of Tier 4, Candace Brownson. While initially closed-minded to interacting with her due to her dorky past self, James then communicates with her after learning of her regressed personality and status. He actually grows a rapport with her, but realizing he must move past her in order to reach Stacy, he somehow betrays her and moves up to Tier 3. Much of this next information can be found in From Sociopath to Psychopath. Shortly after this promotion, James gets the idea to create an anonymous criminal by the name of the White Leech that commits various offenses around his local area, and creates a YouTube channel where he reveals 8 suspects, including himself, as he believes becoming a big name will gather the attention of his classmates, but not conflicted with the safety he exercised by offering 7 other potential leads. I'd like to add that Candace Brownson was good friends with the kingpin of the 3rd tier, Clovis Tanner, who outright opposes Randy Stockler's disgraceful mannerisms of sacrificing students for convenience and tries to become male valedictorian himself, but through ethical strategies as a foil to Almer. After committing a satisfying amount of crimes, James decides to take a break before he gets a call from Max saying the police are starting an investigation towards him, and James starts to panic as he realizes he picked a fatal time to take a break, as he will gradually become a favorite target if the police associate the White Leech's inactivity with his interrogation. He then rushes over to start his next crime before he sees on TV that Hope Allison, one of the suspects he gave, has died in a car accident. He slowly and instinctively calms down as he realizes he can simply cease committing crimes and frame his acts on Hope. If that wasn't enough, James also sneaks into her autopsy room to plant fake evidence into her. Hope was a truly selfless person who raised money for charity, and when she was framed as the White Leech, all her earnings were considered illegitimate and kept away from her target receivers. Somehow this also leads to James's friend Terrence Black moving away. James is saddened by this, but keeps his mouth shut for the sake of reaching Stacy again. And now on to the series midpoint. Hope was good friends with both Candace Brownson and Clovis Tanner, and they were not willing to believe that their friend was a criminal, so they correctly figured that James was the real culprit through thorough guesswork. The police lose sight of the White Leech's identity as a magic organization led by Phoenix Lord begins raising necrophytes, which is basically like zombies except it's limited to the recently deceased, and the people are drastically altered with light complexion, red glowing eyes, and an inexplicably evil personality, and this includes Hope too. Stanford Planning writes letters to students of Sylvellyn High as the Blood Red Ties, offering a truce in order to combine Stanford's collected strength and the school's established competitive audacity to take down Phoenix's supernatural minions. A few people accept this request, and James and Max end up as the de jure leaders, with Almer's impeccable drive to climb the chart and Max's genuine goodwill. Clovis has already raised an army by recruiting high tierities as he truly does not trust Blood Red Ties, and is further angered as he learns James is heavily participating in it. Stacy reaches her boiling point with Randy and apprehends him while she protects the school from necrophytes to establish the heroic will she had all along. At last, there is a 3 superpower battle between James's party, which consists of Max, Jeanette, the mentioned volunteers, and Stanford Planning. Clovis's party, which consists of Candace, Francis, Serene Luna, Lindsay Stern, and a collection of high-tier students, and Phoenix's party, which consists of his organization, and the necrophytes led by Hope Allison against James. Max questions Clovis's deep personal hatred towards James, and he shamefully confesses everything he did to reach Stacy Newman. Max has visible disapproval for this, but shakes it off to focus on the task at hand. Stanford then executes their initial attack, and James throws a notable apathy towards his own classmates dying as a result of his developed cold, conniving nature. Afterwards, James and Max are pretty much strolling along their antagonized adventure, with James being audacious and manipulative in the process. He encounters many of the people who hate him, and unregretfully pisses them all off. In the final episode of the season, James and Max finally reach the necrophytes' base and eradicate the creatures. Following this, Max grows ill and leaves combat to James. With elementary knowledge of the mecha he's operating, James is completely unprepared as Clovis angrily confronts him to arrest him for his previous crimes as well as framing it on Hope. As a last resort, he relies on Stanford to bail him out of the situation, and they blare recorded conversations Clovis has with Candace that blatantly reveals his truce with the high tierities is only temporary and is purely against Randy Stockler, unlike all the other feeble-minded students of Sylvellyn High who mistake him for some kind of martyr. This causes the majority of his comrades to turn on him, and Clovis suffers a heavy decline in influence to all the hierarchies, essentially rendering his pursuance to become male valedictorian fruitless. As the first season draws to a close, James goes home and Max comes back to reveal that he is pregnant. On to Season 2, James enters his junior year, still phased over hearing the news before declaring that he will do whatever he can to support Max and his child. Fortunately, James is happy to see that he has been raised to the second tier and can now officially be called a high tierity. He catches interest in a chess tournament with a grand prize of $10,000 and shares to Max his plan to win the competition. Meanwhile, Candace and Clovis are still emotionally recovering from everything that's happened lately and see James. If you've developed any kind of hatred for this kid by now, then you're in luck. Clovis goes over to him and punches him to the ground and rants about what a selfish scumbag he is. Candace calms him down, and James puts in one last jab in the hostility, prompting her to quickly turn around and flip him off. James unhesitantly gets back to his conversation, and of course he wins the tournament in the end because you should never underestimate the power of a spoiled rich kid who wants something, and gives Max the $10,000. James has chosen various AP courses in hopes of having any of the same classes with Stacy Newman. He doesn't, as Stacy is taking fewer to make the most of her time as female valedictorian. On the other hand, he meets his first girlfriend Cindy Rolson, a second tier who is a top 1% honor student. At one point, James gets the opportunity to visit Terrence along with Max, and he patches things up with Terrence, and he eventually forgives. From here on, Terrence's only chance of appearing again would be in the case of a post-series film or game that spans James's senior year. Anyway, much of the arc is spent with James doing betrayals as usual, with Cindy by his side, and even sells out his own sister at one point. He finds out from Cindy that another person says James's efforts are futile, as Stacy would never accept him. Some why he has reason to believe this and mopes around before confronting said guy and criticizing him, saying he is going to reach Newman anyway just to be able to talk to her even if it's a refusal. He replies he never said anything like that and asks James what made him assume that. James answers he heard it from Cindy Rolson. Up until now, the kingpin for the second tier is never revealed, and it turns out Cindy was the second tier kingpin the entire time and was only using James as a tool in a foiled quest to get into contact with Randy Stockler. James falls into a cartoony depression. His previous moping has stopped him from getting the chance to fight along Stacy somehow, and he is utterly shocked that his girlfriend was just a social climber this whole time. He then realizes he can get said position back by disqualifying the current student, Cindy Rolson. He does this by somehow turning all her friends and family against her, causing her to lose the spot. James usurps her position while Max technologically guides him from afar. He then meets up with Stacy, and they are able to completely resolve the present conflict really fast as a way to show how well these three are together. And now on to the fourth and final arc of the series. James and Max are promoted to Tier 1 for ties with the female valedictorian. At this point, the show just has James and Max casually participate in the school military station, with Randy being a condescending dick of a boss. At one point, James walks in on Randy masturbating in an extremely embarrassing fashion and records it, because why not? Other than that, the show is pretty much like the fourth tier arc, where the plots are simple, which allows for more dumb humor. But not for long. Max goes into labor, and as James is away doing something for status, he hears the news and rushes to the hospital. Max gives birth to his son, which he names Manny. Shortly after, Max dies due to postpartum complications, and James walks into the room to see his best friend dead. And now for the war arc, where Sylvellyn High goes from a surreal comedy about a spoiled rich kid slimily progressing up an arbitrary hierarchy to get to his old friend again, to a sci-fi action with said kid saving the world from a major conglomerate corporation to retrieve the same girl. James returns to school clearly traumatized and half-mindedly walks over to the school intercom and goes on about his controversial political views, confesses that his current friends are just pawns, and even admits to being the White Leech, all before he broadcasts that video he recorded of Randy. This ruthless action grants James the male valedictorian title, and he is given the stole, though not that he is in a position to care. He impulsively goes home, and we get some insight on Stanford planning. It turns out they were the reason Max got knocked up in the first place. All the way back to when James and Max were receiving their letters requesting their military aid, they added on, "P.S. If you refuse them, please take this condom so you can go fuck yourself." Which was just supposed to be another bit of unprofessional humor that the audience wasn't supposed to expect to be crucial in 1,000 years. Anyway, Max and a few other students who got the letter used the condom and died shortly after use, as it was made from radioactive material. Stanford made sure to do this to kill any loose ends who knew that the blood red ties was actually Stanford planning. Max was special in that he survived the first few days all the way into being able to give birth. Stanford now has an incentive to go back to their evil deeds and has gained the necessary influence to invade Sylvellyn High. They break in and capture Stacy Newman, taking the key to the West Wing military station from her soul in the process. They are surprised to learn that not only is James Ulmer still alive, but he has also taken Randy's valedictorian position. And now that the male valedictorian is out of their knowledge, they figure they may leave the East Wing alone in order to lure James out. The news mentions that Stacy Newman is missing, and James, emotionally paralyzed as he already is, assumes she's also been killed and wanders over to the West Wing to commit suicide. Right before he's about to be apprehended, Manny busts in along with Jeanette and takes out Stanford's guards thanks to his kung fu powers granted by the radioactive condom, because why not? After getting away, Jeanette explains to James Stanford's role in all of this, and as a result, he becomes furious. The West Wing fires off to Stanford's base, and the group reaches a truce with Phoenix Lord, and they compromise their powers to upgrade the world. Stanford, High Tierides, and James's enemies are put in charge of guarding Stanford's base, while the Low Tierides are in charge of managing the West Wing. Stacy is taken to the base and is held in a confined space as Queen of World Neo, and Stanford actively looks for the King, James. James cheaply leads a small military in an attempt to retrieve Stacy and avenge Max, only to get taken and run away again. Reluctant to admit it, James figures his only option is to go to Candace and Clovis and ask for their help. They meet and neither one of them complies, leaving James in desperation. Later, they eventually figure their only chance of saving the world is by teaming up with James's party, so they all manage the East Wing and fly up to Stanford's team. Upon sight, James angrily spams all his military power towards Stanford in impulsive rage before Candace and Clovis have to hold him back to prevent any possible disasters. Later, when everything is going like clockwork for Stanford, there is a surprise explosion planned by James's party that allows them to infiltrate the base. James encounters Randy Stockler, who is angry at him for stealing his position. Without Max to guide him, James is hopelessly button mashing on the mecha in hopes of figuring out how to control it. When Randy makes his final aggressive lunge, James figures something out and manages to fatally damage his vessel, destroying it and killing Stockler in the blast. Realizing he just killed someone for the first time, James enters a state of shock before he starts maniacally laughing. In the next episode, James is on a killing spree and brutally murders Francis, Cindy, and Lindsay in bare self-defense. He finally encounters the previous female valedictorian Celeste Mayview, and they start a fight with Mayview mindlessly using students as fodder and James using his own strategy and willpower. Ulmer wins. James takes the FV stole from Celeste and uses the West Wing key to unlock the room Stacy is imprisoned in. They are overcome with hope to see each other and walk out of the currently tame environment. James takes this time to confess to Stacy everything he did, as he believes she has the right to know. Stacy isn't put off by this out of her immense gratitude of being saved. They are about to head back into the East Wing before they realize they will notice Stacy is missing from her room. James resolves this by grabbing Celeste's body, dipping her hair in her blood, turning it red, and putting Newman's coat on her to make a discount Stacy. He obviously has no qualms with this, as established by Hope. Stanford sees no more use for Phoenix and betrays his group, exploding his entire base. James and Stacy retrieve the West Wing and form some strategy that tricks Stanford. James and Stanford contact each other through their military office video calls, and James reveals that him betraying Phoenix was his undoing, and Stanford doubts he would blow him up as he still has Stacy. Stacy shows up on screen proving him wrong, and Stanford actually shows an expression of fear before his entire base explodes in the air along with the tyrannical hierarchy. Afterwards, James speaks at Max's delayed funeral before we see him and Stacy pleasantly walking around Sylvellyn High as a somewhat happy ending. Not only has James retrieved his best friend and avenged Max's fatefully unavoidable death, but with Randy, Celeste, Stanford, and Phoenix gone, with Stacy's great will rendering her an ideal valedictorian, and James working alongside her supporting her all he can, and with Candace and Clovis in favorable vital positions, Sylvellyn High can now begin a new era of peace. The show finally ends off panning into the sky with a transparent Max looking down happy. Holy shit, and that's all. I hope I would and could turn this into an official TV show someday, as like I said, I have never written anything at a faster pace than this. Anyway, thanks for watching. At this point I wouldn't expect any more independent Sylvellyn High content in terms of story, but I may make a compilation with all the priorly mentioned unprofessional humor that started this off in the first place. Thanks for watching and good night.
Oh, by the way, this video has major spoilers.